Welcome to another episode of our Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Ash, and this is a show where I interview proven founders and industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build, launch, and grow your business. In this episode, I talked to Noah, founder of Coordinated Discovery Markets. Noah is a market designer and a game theorist dedicated to creating better economic systems with a background in nuclear engineering and experience in tech startups. During the dot-com boom, Noah's journey has been nothing short of fascinating. His passion for the mathematics of information and computation has driven him to innovate in the field of commodity market design, earning him patents for his groundbreaking work. Noah's expertise and insights are invaluable, and we are excited to dive into his vision for the future of economic system. So I hope you enjoy the show. Noah, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Ash. And a slight correction. Well, I do have a patent. My patent work on commodity markets is being held up through a fairly extraordinary set of bureaucratic craziness at the moment. There is an appeal that has been filed, and last year
Hmm.
it was scheduled to be heard next year. Um,
Okay.
so, so the federal government will comment next in July of 2025.
Wow. I didn't knew that patent is something you have to fight for. I always thought that it's something which you figure out if somebody else doesn't have it and then you get it.
So copyright actually pretty much works that way. If you've
Okay.
ever like jotted down a grocery list here in the United States, and I'm pretty sure that some work was done to kind of unify copyright. So in most places around the world, you
Hmm.
would own the copyright to that grocery list um, just because you wrote it down and it's new. Uh,
Hmm.
if you want to be, like a Stephen King or a J.K. Rowling, it's a pretty good idea to file those copyrights to get the use out of them at that kind of
Hmm.
scale. But
Hmm.
in general, uh, when we record this podcast, it's just automatically copyrighted. If you pull out your phone and film a bug walking on a tree, there you
Hmm.
go, it's already done. But patents are a process of demonstrating that you actually have come up with an idea that nobody's
Hmm.
ever thought of before. And they're also a little stronger. Copyright, um, violation of copyright, because anybody can write down anything. If you
Hmm.
were to attempt to take your grocery list copyright and find somebody else that wrote down a similar or even the same grocery list and say that they were violating your copyright, you would be laughed out of the room because, sort of who cares? There's no commercial viability attached. But
Hmm.
patents are tied explicitly to commercial viability, and they give exclusive rights. So if I were to be granted this patent and somebody else independently of me invented this sort of, by the side or even just before but didn't file for the patent or whatever, and then started using it and had the evidence that they'd never talked to me, they had no idea what I was doing, it wouldn't matter. The patent would still allow me to take out from them. So for example, the very famous case of Gray versus Bell, the patent for the telephone, two patents for telephones were filed within hours of one another at two different places. And they were completely independently invented by two separate inventors. And the Gray patent was ultimately not granted, and they couldn't use their telephone system anymore
Hmm.
because somebody else had the patent to telephone systems.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've never heard about this case, but I'm gonna read about it. It's interesting. So, so, so usually when I start my interviews with my guests, I always ask them about a favorite quote, something that inspires or motivates you that you would like to share with our audience.
I'd have to go with the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Uh,
Hmm.
that seems pretty nice to me.
Yeah, yeah, agree. Yeah. So tell us about coordinated discovery markets then. What does the product or service do? Who is it for? And what's the main problem you're helping to solve here?
So, what the service does is price discovery, uh, and price discovery is the sort of fundamental service that financial markets provide.
Hmm.
There's billions of us that are presently alive. We all have our own lives to live, uh, and commerce needs to happen because nobody produces all the stuff that they actually need to be alive by themselves. And so the difficulty is, how do we manage that? How do we advertise information in such a way that people make the amount of stuff that people need to live and be happy and pursue their crazy projects and everything else? Uh, and so that is essentially this management of supply and demand. The problem is that we've been increasingly plugging computers into these systems.
Hmm.
The London Metals Exchange is actually pretty famous for still having human beings talking to each other, making the final deals. But that's kind of irrelevant because the they're just reflecting the deals that are coming to them from this vast array of computerized bidders and so on that exist sort of just outside the room, if you will.
Hmm.
And so the computers don't have any economic intent or desire. And it turns out that once you pace the system up to computer speeds rather than human speeds, the incentive structure of the existing marketplace to drive towards useful and economically viable prices goes away, uh,
Hmm.
and shifts over to attempting to create spreads that can then be exploited by people who are in an economic position to do so. And as much as it might be nice to have $1 billion income, nobody can actually eat or wear money for a living. Like, we actually need the
Yeah.
stuff, not that. So what coordinated discovery markets do is they basically work exactly in the opposite way of the existing markets from end to end. Instead of deals chasing prices, prices chase deals. And by doing it in this other way, the incentives all also reverse. But for the buyers and sellers, because their incentives are symmetric, reversing them basically doesn't do anything. And for the speculative group, reversing their incentives causes the market to become more stable, more open, more transparent, and more efficient. And so then all you need is a few hundred lines of computer code that can do the computations to allow these groups to work together like this, and then you've got it going.
So for a simple person like me, I don't really understand the market. What I've always learned is, for me, markets are something where you just choose some kind of stock and invest in it, and then if it goes up, your value of the money goes up, and then you withdraw it and then enjoy the profit, and then if it goes down, you lose the money. Is it something similar, or?
So yeah, that's a very encouraged view of how to think about marketplaces. That's somewhat how stock markets work, and
Mhm.
they are fairly divorced at this point from actual economic realities. Uh, the the thing is about price discovery, and so the when you say the market goes up, what does it mean for the market to go up? What it means for the market to go up is there's people who are willing to pay more than you paid,
Hmm.
and for you know a share of stock or a Dogecoin or something that's even more made up than those things, um, the up or down motion of people's desires can be influenced by all sorts of nonsense or very real outcomes. But for actual delivered product, whether it's a good or a service, the desire is rests on economic realities.
Hmm.
So if the price of petrol goes up, it's because people are able to charge more for petrol and have other people still buy it, and it's economically viable for both of those sides. And in many cases, that's because, disruptions in crude production mean that there's just not as much gas around. And so we use price to ration. Uh, if the if price goes up, people become slightly less willing to travel. The people who still actually need to travel pay those higher prices, and they retain their ability to travel around. Uh,
So it's good that you mentioned the example of the fuel, because in the recent events, we in Europe, we saw a huge increase in fuel prices because of, I think, I don't understand international politics too much, but from the news, what I've learned is Europe abandoned, or Europe said no to Putin, that we are not going to buy any fuel or crude oil from you. That said, there was a decrease in, well, increase in demand and decrease in supply, because there's not many suppliers of crude oil, right? And suddenly we, you know, in Europe, we used to pay around, so let's talk about UK. We used to pay 99p or a pound for a liter of fuel, let's say diesel. But suddenly after that, what happened? We started paying 142, which is like a huge jump
yeah,
for a
yeah,
liter.
that's a 43% increase.
Yeah, indeed. And everybody was shattered. It's like, what's going to happen with the price? And then the prices increased for the grocery shops. So everything, including milk, butter, bread, whatever you can see in the grocery store. Then suddenly Uber prices increase, which everybody was actually thinking that they're going to increase. Obviously, with delivery prices increase, the e-commerce got to hype their prices. So everything was connected. So we were like thinking, oh, another shock for Europe. We already took a shock before that when the Brexit happened, and then this one. So it's like inflation has been on like 10 highest in last 50, 60 years. It was horrible. So are we saying that with coordinated discovery market, there is something which could manage this kind of risks, or how does it helps end users, or the market itself?
So the existing market, when it deals with shocks, tends to overreact and then become volatile until it sort of figures out what to do. The coordinated discovery markets basically make their money by managing shocks in ways that are economically ideal, and so it the issue is that in order to fix a supply problem, the people that make the stuff have to be making more money so that they expand.
Mm.
Uh, but the system makes money by absorbing money between supply and demand, and they're faster in general than the edge people are. So when you get a shock, and suddenly customers are like, "Well, I'll pay more," the people that get that money are the middlemen that are figuring out these prices, and they may they make more money by not transmitting that price to the edge users. And so if they have the ability, and they largely do, to
Mm.
absorb that, then the edge users won't see prices come up and won't change their behavior for a while until finally it kind of leaks. So this actually happened in the wheat market. When the Ukrainian invasion happened, Russia and Ukraine are two of the largest wheat producers on earth. Now, the actual two largest wheat producers on earth are Canada and the United States, and we don't operate at capacity. We have a lot of fields that we don't necessarily grow wheat in, um, but when prices in wheat spiked, we didn't grow any extra wheat over here. And the reason we didn't is because that entire price spike was chewed up before it got to the farms. And so the farmers were like, well, we had to hedge everything out in the first place. We're not getting any extra money until we get contracts that have higher dollar values on them. We're not growing more wheat because we're growing all the wheat we can grow economically. If we try to
Mm.
grow more, we'll lose money. We'll go out of business.
Yeah.
So um, what CDM does is it takes those middlemen that currently make money by absorbing as much of the transition as possible, and it becomes easier for them to do that the sharper and more volatile the changes in the markets are,
Mm,
and changes it so that they make money when the two ends are maximally profitable. And so what that does is it means that they make more money the smoother the market behaves and the more equitably the market behaves, because that's what makes those users make more money.
So is it like so? Okay, I'll give you an example. I'm sure you must have heard about Emirates Airlines, right? So they are one of the most profitable airlines. Well, kind of in at least in Middle East and Europe, and what they do, and I have learned it from online sources that the airlines are the businesses who consume quite a lot of fuel because they use it for every single flight. In order to reduce the risk, they insure the crude oil pricing in the international market.
Oh yeah.
I Yeah, okay, you know better than me then. So what I've learned is they have insurance on the pricing then, and if the pricing goes up, then the insurer has to pay the difference. And then if the pricing goes down, they still have to pay what they agreed with the insurer. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah, so that's known as a hedge. And basically what's happened over the last, well, especially the last 50 years, but really with the rise of commodity markets over the last 800 years, is that people that actually need stuff uh, want to insure themselves against market risk. You can't insure yourself against sort of actual risk. So if the airline wanted to secure their gas, supplies, and like the physical ships that was moving the fuel to the airport blew up, they wouldn't get their gas because
Yeah.
the gas that they were going to get doesn't exist. Other gas like that wouldn't happen.
Mm,
So you cannot insure against that risk. Now, fortunately, that risk is quite low. For the most part, we live in a fairly liquid, fairly replaceable society, and weevils don't eat like every single grain of rice on earth or something that would
mm,
cause that kind of thing to happen. But there's still market risk where you don't know whether or not a counterparty will perform. Um, and at the end of the day, some performing counterparty is necessary for a deal to be made. And
mm,
so the market has this system of people sort of voluntarily setting themselves up as counterparties. And these hedges allow you to make a deal not with somebody that actually makes this stuff, who
mm,
might get struck by lightning or go out of business or be a cheat, or anything might happen to them. There's traffic. uh, you make a deal instead in general with some middleman that's got fairly large degrees of resources, and they absorb the risk on both sides, and in exchange for this service they charge premiums. And
mm,
so the kind of situation you're describing is similar to what these wheat farmers were going through. They had these insured prices moved up a lot, the insurers made a lot of money on those much higher prices, but they missed out on that opportunity to make more money. And we missed out on the signal of them making more money to ameliorate food shortages, which
mm,
if they had made the more money, they would have. And so the key thing there is that these middlemen aren't saints, and they're not magic. They're just big and have this capacity, but
mm.
none of them are as big as the entire marketplace.
Yeah.
So what I do in CDM is I essentially redesign the marketplace so that your counterparty is not one particular person, it's everybody that's on the other side of trades is your counterparty. And so the risk mitigation is actually maximized. It's not possible to have less market risk than a fully subscribed CDM, because that's all of the human factors cleaned out. And of course, nobody can control, like, the natural factors. If an asteroid, drains the North Sea, and nothing's going across there anymore, well, the fact that you have this insurance isn't really going to do anything for you, because force majeure, act of God, it just doesn't physically exist. You got to cope with
Yeah.
the new world.
Yeah, yeah, great. I mean, I do. I'm eager to learn more, and I'm also eager to learn more about yourself and how did you got into this venture. But before we go to that part, let's talk about where the story began. Where did the idea for coordinated discovery market came from?
So I was actually walking through my backyard. I had just sort of excitedly gone over to my friend and next door neighbor's house to explain to him that I'd had this new approach that allowed me to price transaction costs. And he had asked me if I could use that approach to buy stock market information in order to trade the stock market profitably. And I had explained that that wasn't possible. And so I was walking back to my house, and I had this thought that the reason it isn't possible is that the market already pays you for information. That's how it works,
Hmm.
which I hadn't really thought of it like that before. And it occurred to me that if you could price transaction costs, there might be some way not to play in existing markets, but for a marketplace itself to price its own transaction costs to extract information more efficiently. And that was really intriguing as an idea to me, and I decided to try to figure out how a sort of recursive, self-interested marketplace could exist, and started that process of trying to figure out how to make that work, and ultimately that became coordinated discovery markets.
Awesome. So is how does a person who, let's take a hypothetical situation. If somebody wants to trade in your market, does it exist, or what's the process, or is which stage you are right now?
Yeah, so there are a handful of people around the world. There's three right now that are actually attempting to build markets that have the technology incorporated. No existing markets have the technology incorporated. Um, if a hypothetical person was, if one of them existed and a hypothetical person wanted to trade, basically there's three doors. There's the producer, negotiator, and consumer door. And that person would pretty much need to take a look at, like, the screen on the wall and decide whether or not they felt that they could gain an economic advantage by walking through one of the doors. So if you take a look at the prices that are currently being offered, and you think, hey, I could make money selling these things, then you should get get that together, go over to the producer door, look at the prices that are available, decide how much you want to sell, walk through and sell that much. If, on the other hand, at the prices it looks like you could make money buying things, that's what you should do. And if you, either in addition to those or just separately, believe that you understand something about the fate of oil prices or corn prices or cotton prices or whatever, you should walk through the negotiator door and put your investment down and get yourself signed up for getting a rate back that's much higher than existing markets offer for useful price information.
Hmm. So instead of just buying and selling, CDM has three doors, because I think,
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's the really big change, is that the existing markets gain price information through an emergent process.
Hmm.
So essentially, they just have buyers and sellers, but some of those buyers and sellers are these sort of middle groups we were talking about before that have a lot of information and a lot of money, and actually usually a lot of material. But what they don't really have is the ability to make stuff or use stuff. And they're looking to get a return on their capital.
Hmm.
Uh, and so what happens is the there's price makers and price takers. And in general, the people that are sort of economically useful, people that pull crap out of the ground or make things, they are price takers because they have other focuses. They have an expertise in geology or agronomy or textiles or something, and
Hmm.
that's how they make money, with that expertise. And then other people have expertise in macroeconomics and insider trading and whatever, and so they make money on that part. But there's no clear disconnect between those two things, and so what's been able to happen with computers becoming much better at information processing, the middle people have been able to take larger and larger shares of the economy for themselves, and that doesn't actually grow things. There's some famous charts. They're U.S. oriented, but they're kind of a global phenomenon, where if you chart productivity in the 20th century, worker productivity, and you chart median incomes, um, both of those go up very rapidly for the first two-thirds to three-quarters of the 20th century. Um, we're building more and better machines. We get computers online. We get telephone networks everywhere. We electrify, the countryside. People are getting richer and richer and more productive and in lockstep. And
Hmm.
then in this country, it was in the 70s. In other countries, it happens at other times. Median incomes essentially just flatline, and productivity keeps soaring. Why did that happen? Well, it happened because the new kind of productivity, computer productivity, granted greater advantages economically to the people who are in charge of things than the people who actually do work. And so they were able to essentially sweep up the productivity gains for themselves without having any of it leak out. Well, that spring has an awful lot of strain on it after 50 plus years at this point, and that that difference is what this rectifies.
So do you, okay, that's interesting because that is something exactly what is happening right now, isn't it? We are in at the verge of, well, we have already started with AI and everything. AI is improving the productivity not just for individuals but for factories. There are robots who are like jumping here and there in all the exhibitions right now. What do you think? Is it going to happen in 21st century also, where we're gonna have, well, we had this spike in the salaries from 2000 onwards. If not just about the IT, but if you look into finance, HR, everywhere you go, you see people who are making 10 times more than what they what the similar kind of skilled people used to make in, I don't know, 2008 or 6 or something like that. But now, being introduced with AI, people who used to hire these people, for example, we had, I don't know, 10,000 people fired in UK by Amazon, and not from the workforce, from their AWS team who look after their product, their development, IT department. And then there was Google and Meta. They also fired, like, so altogether there were like more than 60,000 people without a job instantly within a couple of years. Does that tells you that it's going to be on the similar path what you just explained back in 70s?
Well, yeah. So that gets into a much deeper issue where our societies were put together by people that didn't understand computers because they hadn't been invented yet.
Hmm.
Um, and and we don't have any kind of social, cultural, or economic understanding of what computers are actually capable of and what we might use them for. Uh, and so we're cracking up under the strain. Um, there's a sort of there's a quality of evolutionary systems that they they build in defenses for attacks that happen frequently and that you can do something about, but they don't build in defenses against sort of nothing. So this is something I've talked about on my podcast. There's a little known sort of survival hierarchy. It's air, shelter, water, food. So so exposure, if you're ever out in the woods, quick note, if it's too hot or too cold, that will kill you faster than lack of drinking water or food will. Uh, but for these, if you don't have enough food in your system, your body will tell you that you're hungry. If you don't have enough water in your system, your body will tell you you're thirsty. If you're going to die of exposure, your body will tell you that you're hot or you're cold. But air's the most important one. If you don't have enough air in your system, your body won't tell you anything. The human body essentially has no ability to determine that its blood doesn't have oxygen in it,
Hmm.
because it's so unbelievably rare for that to happen to people, except when they're drowning. Uh, and there's essentially nothing you can do about it. If you find yourself in an environment that doesn't happen to have oxygen in it, you'll just be dead in seconds, and that'll
Hmm.
be the end of that. So we have lived for millennia in an environment where every single message and decision was made by a human person, because nothing that wasn't a human person could compose a message or make a decision. And for 70 years now, we have been gradually replacing human decisions and human messaging with machine derived messages and systems. And AI, which is a lot older than the current hype cycle would have you believe, has been the dominant trading force in our markets for decades now. Uh, and so we should be relatively unsurprised, although, you know, it's sort of horrifying enough that you might want to not think about it, that our markets aren't really serving our economic desires anymore because most of the players are machines that don't care about anything.
Hmm. How? Okay, so current markets are not suitable.
Yes.
How does CDM disrupts it, and why should the current market move to CDM approach?
Well, the primary form of disruption is by changing the costs and incentives in ways that are uncompetable. So the existing markets, on average, uh, according to the U.S. government figures, about $1.06 gets absorbed in the transfer from the person who's taking delivery and the person who's making delivery.
Wow.
So if $6 are spent at the warehouse, then $5 gets to the farm gate or the mine or whatever. Um, the second issue is that these middlemen figures, these informed forecasters, uh, they're getting returns in the 15% range. So you put $100,000 at risk, you get back at the end of the year $115,000. And so, in order to make real money, what they're looking to do is get other people to give them their money, and also to go to the banks and say, I got people to give me $100 million. Why don't you give me a loan for $1 billion secured on that? And then I'll invest that $1 billion. I'll make $150 million. I'll give you your loan back and good interest, and I'll be able to pay off, good things to them and so on. And so all of that sort of inflates the currency, makes things less and less real. Uh, and that's all very bad. The less real information we have, the more
Mm.
foolishly we behave. uh, CDM allows all of these things to get better at the same time. uh, oh, I left out the craziest one. So the operators actually operate at a very tiny margin. The CME Group, which is the number one commodity exchange on earth, uh, has annual revenues of $4 billion. And that's in an environment where the total cost of the transition of commodities through their system is around $1 trillion. So
Oof.
they're getting less than 0.5% of the total transaction costs to actually run the marketplaces themselves.
Mm.
So we add this up in CDM, because the negotiators are in this quasi mutual game. They're playing a mutual game that's actually being paid extra money from commissions from the buyers and sellers. So it's positive sum, not negative sum like they have to deal with right now. And because we can control the ratio between how much investment capital there is and how much projected uh, uh, money will come in from the deal flow, we can actually set average rates of return to be effectively whatever we want. So whereas the average rate of return in the market today is maybe 15%, maybe they're a lot better and it's 20%, maybe they're having a rough year and it's 12%, you could have an average rate of return of 200% a year. And instead of having to go collect other people's money and try to get loans and take all of this risk, you could take your $100,000, invest it, be mostly right, and get an extra $100,000 back out, or an extra $150,000 back out, without having to do any of this extra stuff. At the
Yeah.
same time, that spread can be narrowed, and the operator can actually make more money too. So if I'm getting $4 in every thousand, and the cost is $166 in every thousand, I can cut those costs by a factor of 10 to 16 and double mine to 8, and there's still room left over. Or I could cut those costs in half to 88, and I could make 10 times as much money as I'm currently making to 40, and there'd be room there too. So as long as there's room between these two things, there's enormous scope for an operator to make vastly more money.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong then. You mentioned that instead of going to these mediators, let's take your example. You put 100,000 pounds to this company who has convinced thousands of people to give them money, and then they went to the bank, and then they got their 100 million as a collateral, and they got a loan of 1 billion, and then they invested, got the interest, and then they disperse the money and make profit out of that money, which is making profit out of air, I guess, because essentially what they're providing is the important thing they're providing. It's kind of security, and security in human tendency is very, very precious, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's an actual real service.
Yeah.
These people come in for sort of a lot of hate, and some of it sadly is quite deserved. But there's an actual real service there. But as I pointed out, the service is market security. What they're providing is protection from market behavior.
Mm.
Uh, and what CDM does is it says, okay, we're going to build a marketplace that's safe, that all of that security is actually built in at the front end. And we're going to
Mm.
offer all the current players better deals than the current market can offer them because of that security, because we're going to incentivize that security as the primary form of the market. So by doing it this way, which is this is the hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around because it's totally backwards from everybody's existing instincts. Um, they now get to provide a different but related service, the service that they're actually providing to the markets. They're providing deal information to the marketplace. And because they can provide that deal information, not just to the specific person that they have a deal with, as in the existing market, but instead of provide that deal information to the entire market simultaneously. Right now, these markets, so something like $300 billion a year of rice gets grown every year and traded. But
Hmm.
the markets trade a very large fraction, multiple. So it isn't $3 billion worth of rice that gets traded every year. Trillions of dollars of rice get traded every year, but
Hmm.
most of it's just paper. And so
Yeah.
those security people, there's like 40 or 50 security steps that are in there. And they can only make deals if you're one of these, if you're this hedge fund, this hypothetical hedge fund that's like dealing with $1 billion in this environment that's maybe $10 trillion in size,
Hmm.
you're actually only affecting a thousandth of 1% or a hundredth of 1% of the marketplace. So you have this incredibly tiny fraction that you have to work really hard to try to get your 15% back out, because you don't make it, then you're going to get chewed up by all the fees and stuff.
Yeah.
But with CDM, your information gets striped across the entire market automatically. So instead of having to take on risk yourself with taking that loan from the bank and trying to get other people in that are willing to trust you and having to do all that, you automatically get everything striped across the entire market. So if you can find information that's valuable to the marketplace, doesn't matter how, and
Hmm.
provide it to the marketplace, you can get this incredible rate of return even with very small amounts of money. And so rather than having to come up with a way to corral $1 billion out of other people, if you're operating at 100% growth rate a year, you'll get to $1 billion in 20 years with a starting point of 1,000.
Hmm. Interesting. And that would be the dream of every single entrepreneur on the earth.
Quite a few of them. Yeah, some people insist on going even faster than that, but if that's who you are, come talk to me and we can set up a CDM and you can get way faster than that.
So let's talk about it then. So for a person who doesn't understand markets or doesn't understand finance and how the markets work, but they have some savings, how do they come to you? What's the process? What's the step-by-step process? And how does the number look after, let's say, for example, if you want to start with $10,000?
Well, so the trick with CDM is that it's about what kind of value you can offer to the marketplace. So there's three kinds of value you can offer to the market. Either you make stuff that is worth buying,
Mhm.
or you need stuff because you can turn it into something else that you can economically gain from, or you have information about the stuff. So if the market's for corn, then the stuff in this equation is corn. If the market's for copper, the stuff in this equation is copper, and so on. So if you're just somebody that has a pile of cash and is like, how can I put this to work for me? Well, that's not the question. The question is, how can you benefit the market for X? Can you make silk? Can you buy cotton? Can you understand where the natural gas market is going to be in 6 months? If you can't do those things, you're not valuable to the marketplace, in which case you should probably go find some economically viable thing to do with your money. Maybe check out markets and see if you want to start a business. Um, if somebody just wants to support sort of this particular thing coming into existence, there is a petition out. My patent is, I think I mentioned, in some incredibly crazy snarl. So there's a petition up on change.org please sign and share that around and let people know that the world could be much more economically viable. Um, and that's a thing where if people were to sort of, put their names down on a list and become a viable interest in this, that's something that could lever one of these things off the ground and get them operating. Um, as an operator, again, that that's where you sort of have the biggest bang for your buck. Getting into operation is a regulatory process. And so you need to get together a large enough pile of cash to be able to navigate the bureaucratic regulations of the districts in which you want to operate.
Hmm.
And so eh, one person with $10,000 is going to need to club together with a lot of other people that would want to
Yeah.
go through that. I don't object if you want to be interested. Um, I've had a lot of conversations with people. As I say, there's about 3 people that are actually trying it. I've had a lot of conversations with people that want to go second. They want to create the second market.
Hmm.
Um, that's cool too. Like that. These things help. And if I could get enough names on lists, then that becomes power in itself. That's how Robinhood launched, actually. Um, Robinhood uh, wasn't funded, it wasn't regulatorily viable, um, and couldn't advertise for customers, but they advertised what they wanted to do and sort of offered this way to record interest, and that went viral. And that number got so big they were able to use that to acquire the funding to actually form Robinhood. Sadly,
Hmm.
Robinhood is sort of the anti CDM. They basically make money by making things worse for people, but that's still a viable model potentially.
Right. Right. Okay, great. I mean, it's really interesting to learn more about it, but unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I have to wrap up this interview. But before we go into that, I have a lightning round for you, where I always ask the 6 quick-fire questions to my guests. So just answer them if you quickly as you can. Is that
Do my
okay with you?
best.
Yeah,
Let's go.
great. Let's wrap it up then. Um, what's one of the best piece of business advice you have received?
Simplify your message.
Hmm. So that it could be understood by many people or the people whom you are explaining it. Good one. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
The Shockwave Rider by John Brunner. That's one of my standard go-tos. It's one of the best pieces of science fiction of the 20th century. It anticipates many of the technologies of today, like the internet, computer viruses, and goes into a rather cynical view of their social impacts.
Nice one. Good. I'll add it to my reading list. What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
Insanity.
Hmm. Totally. You have to be insane to do things and make people believe you.
I'm attempting to break that mold, and I think it's probably one of my biggest mistakes.
Well, we'll see soon once your market is everywhere and everybody is
Yes.
doing it. Yeah, great. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Uh, Mathematics. Um, yeah. I think that the being able to leverage the power of nearly every intelligent person who's ever lived to solve problems for you is pretty fantastic.
It is indeed. Definitely. Great. Um, what's a new or a crazy business idea you would like to pursue if you had time?
Disposable nuclear reactors.
Ooh, that would be good. Have you heard that in Europe, we are developing SMRs, small.
Oh, yes, yes. Small nuclear reactors are
Yeah.
technology I'm familiar with. They were developed for the DEW line, among other things. The a idea that I've been toying around with for decades is a small breeder reactor whose operational cycle is actually a refueling cycle, and an efficient manner to do that in, so that you would essentially build an SMR that would have a 2 to 3 year lifespan, and then have more fuel in it when it went offline than it did when you built it in the first place. So you could then use that to cycle through and build more reactors in an assembly line fashion.
Oh, that would be cool. It's like making fuel out of making fuel.
Yeah, yeah. So it turns out uranium and thorium, the parts of it that are useful atomically, are a very, very tiny fraction. But by setting up your reactor properly, you can turn the parts that aren't useful through neutron bombardment into useful fuels. And so the problem with this is that it's extremely proliferatory because the useful fuels that it creates are potential bomb usage issues. So it's a technologically interesting problem. It's an even more politically and sociologically difficult problem to cope with.
Yeah, yeah. I've learned about a little bit of it when I visited CERN in back in the days. But yeah. So last question, which is last but not least, what's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Well, I've been on over 100 podcasts, so most of my interesting facts are are kind of known at this point. Uh, yeah, I'm kind of boring. I just like, read and think about math problems most of the time.
Hmm? It's not boring. A lot of people love it. A lot of
Well,
people.
I do, but yeah, I don't have any, like, secret box to another planet or anything. Or, you know, one time I had to kill like the president of Paraguay with a fork. That's I think that's a John Cusack line. Like, like, I just kind of hang out and learn stuff.
Great, great. Well, Noah, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking, last few years of building this business with CDM and some of the ups and downs. People want to check out Coordinated Discovery Market. What they have to Google and what's the website? And if people want to get in
So
touch with you,
there's
what's the
yeah,
best way?
so coordinated discovery market will find it, and in fact, because I invented the term and I've been talking about this for a decade, you can actually ask any of the AIs what a coordinated discovery market is, and they'll tell you.
Oh,
They'll give
awesome.
you a pretty accurate description of exactly what I'm doing. Uh,
Mm,
I do have a website at coordis.com. I also have a podcast I co-host with the former CTO of Reddit, where we talk about AI, called The Fourth Age, the AI Revolution. And as I mentioned, I have a petition on change.org under CDM underscore patent. The CDM is in all caps. And yeah, anybody who would like there to be an economy in the future, please sign and share the petition, because we're going to have to do something. The economy we have doesn't, it's on its last legs.
awesome. Awesome. Great. Well, that was great to know. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you're doing through CDM. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on our Founders Podcast.
Thank you very much. Had a great time.
Great. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Founders Podcast. I hope you found our conversation with Noah insightful and inspiring. I'll be putting the website URL and Noah's LinkedIn, if agreed, in the description. So don't forget to check it out. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and stay updated on future interviews with proven founders and industry experts. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and keep building.